What if everything you thought was already decided wasn't? What if the quiet years you believed were only meant for rest were actually waiting for something new? What if, at an age when most people slow down, you could begin again? Margaret Ellis used to wake up at exactly 6:30 every morning, not because she had to, but because she had done it for over 40 years. Her body no longer needed an alarm clock. It remembered. The habit stayed, even after everything else had changed. Her house in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio was always still at that hour. No footsteps upstairs, no radio playing in the kitchen, no voice calling her name from another room, just silence, a soft, patient silence that had slowly become part of her life. She would sit at the edge of her bed for a moment before standing, not tired, not exactly sad, just aware. Aware that the day ahead looked very much like yesterday, and the day before that, and the week before that. At 72, Margaret had already lived what most people would call a full life. She had been a teacher for 38 years. She had raised two children. She had loved deeply, and she had lost deeply. Her husband, Daniel, passed away 7 years ago. It wasn't sudden. There had been time to prepare, time for hospital visits, time for quiet conversations, time for holding hands without needing words. And yet, when the moment came, it still felt impossible. After Daniel was gone, the house didn't feel empty at first. It felt paused, as if he had just stepped out and would return any minute. Margaret kept his favorite chair exactly where it had always been. She still made 2 cups of tea in the evening for months, one for herself, and one that slowly grew cold. Grief, she learned, didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like a slow fog, quiet, persistent, hard to notice at first, until one day you realize you can no longer see clearly. Years passed. Her children visited when they could. They called often. They cared, but they had their own lives in different cities, different states. Margaret never blamed them. She had raised them to be independent. Now they were, and she was proud of that. Still, pride didn't always fill the space. So Margaret built a routine: morning tea, a short walk down Maple Street, a stop at the same small grocery store, afternoons with books, evenings with television that she didn't always pay attention to. It was a good life, a safe life, a quiet life. But somewhere inside, something had become very small, not gone, just smaller than before, like a light turned low. One afternoon, while organizing an old closet, Margaret found a wooden box she hadn't opened in years. It was placed carefully behind a stack of folded blankets, hidden but not forgotten. She recognized it immediately. Daniel had made it for her, a long time ago. She sat down on the floor, holding the box in her lap. For a moment, she didn't open it. She just looked at it, running her fingers along the edges, feeling the small imperfections in the wood. He was never a professional craftsman, but he made things with patience and love. Finally, she lifted the lid. Inside were old photographs, letters, and something she hadn't expected to see: a small bundle of fabric. Carefully folded, she picked it up slowly, unwrapped it, and there it was: a hand-stitched table runner, soft, slightly faded, but still beautiful. Margaret blinked, then smiled. A real smile, the kind she hadn't felt in a long time. "I made this," she whispered. She remembered now. It had been decades ago, back when the children were still young, back when evenings were filled with noise and laughter and small creative projects at the kitchen table. She used to sew, not professionally, just for joy. Curtains, pillow covers, little gifts for neighbors. She loved choosing fabrics, mixing colors, creating something simple but meaningful. At some point, she had stopped, not because she didn't love it anymore, but because life became busy. Then later, because life became quiet. Margaret held the fabric in her hands for a long time. Something inside her shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. That evening, instead of turning on the television, she placed the table runner on her dining table. She stepped back, looked at it, adjusted it slightly, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something close to curiosity. The next day, she walked a little further than usual, past the grocery store, past the familiar street corner, until she reached a small craft shop she had passed many times, but never entered. She stood outside for a moment, looking through the window. Colorful fabrics lined the walls, threads, tools, patterns, possibilities. She hesitated, not because she didn't want to go in, but because something inside her whispered, "Is it too late for this?" The question stayed with her, quiet, uncomfortable, familiar. She almost turned around, almost went back to her routine, back to what was safe. But then, she remembered the box, the fabric, the smile, and without allowing herself too much time to think, Margaret opened the door. A small bell rang softly as she stepped inside. The air smelled like cotton and wood and something new. A young woman behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Good morning," she said gently. Margaret nodded. "Good morning." Her voice felt unused, like it hadn't spoken in a new place for a long time. She walked slowly through the store, touching fabrics, looking at colors, feeling something wake up, piece by piece. She didn't know it yet, but that small step, that quiet decision to walk into a place she had ignored for years, would change everything. Not all at once, not in a dramatic, life-changing moment, but slowly, gently, in the way that real change often happens, one small action at a time, one quiet yes after another. Because sometimes a new life doesn't begin with a big decision. It begins with a simple question. Is it too late? And an even simpler answer. Maybe not. Margaret didn't leave the shop with much that day, just a few pieces of fabric, some thread, and a pair of scissors she didn't really need. But what she carried home was something far more important. A feeling, light, uncertain, but alive. That afternoon, she sat by the window with her materials. The sunlight fell softly across the table. She unfolded the fabric, smoothed it carefully with her hands, and for a moment, she didn't move, because beginning again, even something small, can feel surprisingly big. Her fingers hesitated above the cloth, not because she had forgotten how, but because it had been so long since she allowed herself to try. Outside, a car passed slowly. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Life continued, as it always did. But inside that quiet room, something new was starting. Not a business. Not yet. Not even a plan. Just a beginning. And sometimes, that is more than enough. Margaret took a slow breath, picked up the scissors, and made the first cut. A simple line across the fabric, not perfect, but real. And in that small, quiet moment, without knowing it, she had just taken the first step toward a life she never imagined possible at 72. The first cut was not perfect. It was slightly uneven. Margaret noticed it immediately. Of course she did. She had always noticed details. As a teacher, she used to correct papers with careful attention, circling small mistakes in red ink, writing gentle notes in the margins. Now, sitting by the window with a piece of soft fabric in her hands, she felt that same instinct rise again. The instinct to fix, to improve, to do things properly. For a brief moment, she almost put the scissors down, almost folded the fabric away, almost told herself, "You're out of practice." But then something inside her answered quietly, "So what?" The question surprised her. It didn't sound like the careful, a cautious voice she had been listening to for years. It sounded different, lighter, kinder. Margaret looked down at the uneven edge again. Then she smiled just a little. "Not perfect," she said softly, "but it's a start." And instead of correcting it immediately, she continued, slowly, patiently, one stitch at a time. The afternoon passed without her noticing. The sunlight shifted across the room, from bright gold to soft orange, from the table to the floor, and then quietly, it was gone. Margaret only realized how much time had passed when the room began to feel dim. She blinked, looked up, and for a second, she didn't recognize the feeling in her chest. It wasn't loneliness. It wasn't emptiness. It was engagement. She had been present, fully present, for hours. That night, she didn't turn on the television at all. Instead, she made herself a simple dinner, soup and toast, and placed it carefully on the table next to the fabric she had been working on. She ate slowly, looking at her work between bites, not judging it, just noticing. The stitches were uneven in places. The lines weren't perfectly straight, but there was something about it that felt alive because she had made it, not years ago, but today. The next morning, Margaret woke up at 6:30 again, as always. But something was different. She didn't sit at the edge of the bed as long as she usually did. She stood up a little sooner, moved a little faster, as if there was something waiting for her. And in a way, there was. After her morning tea, she returned to the table by the window. The fabric was still there, quiet, unfinished, inviting. She sat down, touched it gently, and continued. Day by day, the small project grew, not quickly. Margaret didn't rush. She allowed herself to move at a natural pace, to enjoy the process, to make mistakes, to pause when needed. And slowly, something else began to grow alongside the fabric. Confidence, not the loud, bold kind, but a quiet confidence, the kind that says, "I can still learn. I can still create. I am not finished." A week later, she returned to the craft shop. This time, she didn't hesitate outside. She opened the door without stopping. The small bell rang again. The same soft sound. The same young woman looked up from behind the counter, and her face brightened with recognition. "Oh, hi, you came back," she said warmly. Margaret nodded. "Yes, I did." There was something simple but meaningful in that exchange. Someone had noticed her return. Someone expected something, even if it was small. "What are you working on?" the young woman asked. Margaret paused. She wasn't used to talking about what she was doing. For years, no one had asked. "A table runner," she said finally. "I used to sew a long time ago." The young woman smiled. "That's wonderful. Do you want to show me?" Margaret hesitated for a second, then reached into her bag and carefully pulled out the fabric. She held it gently, as if it might break. The young woman leaned forward, her eyes focused, not judging, just looking. "It's beautiful," she said. Margaret blinked. "Beautiful?" She almost laughed. "It's not very even," she added. The young woman shook her head softly. "It doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful." Margaret felt something shift again. That sentence stayed with her, even after she left the shop, even after she returned home. It doesn't have to be perfect. She repeated it quietly to herself. That afternoon, instead of trying to fix every small imperfection, she allowed the fabric to be what it was, a reflection of her hands, her time, her presence, and for the first time in a very long time, she stopped trying to be perfect. 2 weeks passed. The table runner was finished. Margaret placed it on the dining table once again, just like the old one she had found in the box. But this one was different. This one was new. She walked around the table slowly, looking at it from different angles, the stitching, the colors, the small imperfections, and something inside her whispered, "What now?" The question didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel like pressure. It felt like possibility. Margaret sat down in her chair. The quiet house surrounded her again, but the silence felt different now, less empty, more open. She thought about making another one, trying a different color, a different pattern, but then another thought appeared, unexpected, unfamiliar. What if someone else would like this? She frowned slightly. The idea felt strange. For years, she had made nothing, and now, after one small project, she was thinking about sharing it, selling it. "No," she said quietly, "that's not for me." But the thought didn't disappear. It stayed, soft, persistent, like a small knock on a door she hadn't opened yet. The next time she visited the craft shop, she noticed something she hadn't paid attention to before. Near the counter, there was a small display table. On it were handmade items, scarves, bags, decorations, each one with a small tag, a name, a price. Margaret stood there longer than she intended, looking, observing, imagining. The young woman noticed. "We feature local handmade pieces," she explained. "Some of our customers sell their work here." Margaret nodded slowly. "They sell these?" "Yes," the young woman said. "People love things that are made by hand. They feel special." Margaret didn't answer right away. She just kept looking. At the stitches, the textures, the individuality of each piece. None of them were perfect, but all of them were real. That night, Margaret placed her table runner back on the dining table. Then she sat down across from it, as if she were having a conversation with it. "It doesn't have to be perfect," she whispered again. Her fingers rested lightly on the fabric. "What if someone else would like this?" The question returned. This time, she didn't push it away. She let it stay. She let herself imagine a stranger walking into a shop, seeing her work, touching it, choosing it, taking it home. The idea felt both exciting and terrifying because it meant something new, something unknown, something that required her to step outside the quiet, safe world she had built. Margaret leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a slow breath. At 72. Was she really thinking about starting something new? The old voice returned, the familiar one. "You're too old for this." But now, it wasn't the only voice anymore. Another voice, quieter but stronger than before, answered gently. "Or maybe, you're finally ready." Margaret opened her eyes, looked at the table runner one more time, and for the first time, she didn't just see a finished piece of fabric, she saw a possibility, small, unclear, but real. She didn't make a decision that night. She didn't need to, because something had already begun. Not a business, not yet, but a shift, a willingness to consider something new. And sometimes, before a life changes on the outside, it changes quietly on the inside. Margaret turned off the lights and walked slowly to her bedroom. The house was still quiet, still familiar, still hers. But as she lay down and closed her eyes, the future no longer felt like something behind her. It felt like something waiting. And somewhere, deep inside that quiet waiting, a new question was beginning to take shape. Not, is it too late? But, what if I try? What if I try? The question stayed with Margaret long after the lights were turned off. It followed her into sleep. It rested quietly in her mind through the night. And when she opened her eyes the next morning at 6:30, it was still there, not loud, not demanding, just present. She sat at the edge of her bed, as she always did. But this time, something was different. She didn't feel like she was waking up to repeat the same day. She felt like she was standing at the beginning of something she didn't fully understand yet. Something small, something uncertain, but something that belonged to her. After her morning tea, she walked into the living room. The table runner was still there, resting neatly on the dining table. Soft morning light touched its surface, highlighting every stitch, every line, every imperfection. Margaret stepped closer. Her fingers hovered just above the fabric. She didn't touch it this time. She just looked, as if she were seeing it from a distance, as if she were seeing it the way a stranger might. Would someone really like this? Would someone choose this? Would someone pay for something she made now, at this stage of her life? The questions came quickly, familiar doubts dressed in new forms. She took a slow breath, and instead of answering them immediately, she turned away, not to avoid them, but to do something simple and something practical. She picked up her phone. Margaret had owned a smartphone for years. Her children insisted on it. It's easier to stay in touch, Mom. It's safer. You can look things up. She used it for calls, messages, occasionally checking the weather. But that was all. The rest of it, the apps, the endless possibilities, they felt like a different world. A world that moved too fast. A world that belonged to younger people. But that morning, she held the phone a little differently. Not as something she had to use, but as something she might explore. She sat down slowly in her chair. The phone in her hands felt unfamiliar, heavier than usual, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. People sell things, she said softly to herself. I've seen it. She remembered the display table at the shop, the handmade items, the small tags, the quiet pride behind each piece. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She hesitated, then tapped. The screen lit up, bright, full of icons, so many choices, too many perhaps. For a moment, she felt that familiar urge to stop, to put the phone down, to return to what was comfortable. But then she remembered something the young woman had said. People love things that are made by hand. Margaret swallowed gently. Then, slowly, she opened the internet browser. Her fingers moved carefully, typing each letter one by one. How to sell handmade items online. She paused after typing, reading the sentence. It looked strange. Not because of the words, but because she had written them. She pressed search. The screen changed. Suddenly, there were pages of information, websites, images, guides, stories. Margaret blinked. It felt overwhelming, like standing at the edge of a very large room filled with doors, each one leading somewhere unknown. She didn't know where to begin, but she didn't close the door either. Instead, she chose the first thing she could understand. A simple article, basic steps, clear words. She read slowly, carefully, sometimes reading the same sentence twice, not because she couldn't understand it, but because she wanted to be sure. Take a photo of your product. Create a listing. Set a price. Margaret frowned slightly. A photo? A listing? A price? Each step felt small, but together, they felt like a mountain. She looked over at the table runner again, then back at the phone, then back at the table runner. A quiet conversation was happening inside her. You don't know how to do this. That's true. You might make mistakes. That's also true. You might fail. She paused, then answered softly, Yes, I might. The word might stayed with her. It didn't mean certain failure. It meant possibility, both good and bad, and for the first time, that felt acceptable. Margaret placed the phone down on the table. She stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked outside. The same street, the same houses, the same quiet morning. But inside her, something was moving. She turned back toward the table, picked up the table runner, held it gently. If I were to try, she said quietly, I would need a picture. The sentence felt simple, doable, not overwhelming, just one step. She looked around the room, the lighting, the space, the table. She adjusted the fabric slightly, smoothed it again, straightened the edges as best as she could. Then she picked up her phone, opened the camera. Her hands were not completely steady, but they were steady enough. She leaned forward, framed the shot, paused, and then she pressed the button. A soft click. The image appeared on the screen. Margaret looked at it carefully. It wasn't perfect. The lighting could be better. The angle could be improved. But it was real. She had taken it. That mattered. She took another one and another, each time adjusting slightly, learning, improving, not perfectly, but naturally. After a few tries, she sat back down, scrolling through the photos, choosing one, not the best, but the one she liked. On the one that felt honest. This is mine, she whispered. There was something powerful in that sentence, not loud, but steady. She returned to the article, reading the next step. Create an account. Margaret took a deep breath. This part felt bigger, more official, more real. She hesitated longer this time. Her finger hovered over the screen. The old voice returned again. You don't belong here. This is not your world. But now, that voice didn't feel as strong as before, because something had changed. She had already taken steps, small ones, but real ones. She had cut the fabric. She had finished the piece. She had taken the photo. Each action had quietly built something inside her, something that didn't need permission, something that didn't ask for approval. Margaret straightened her back slightly and pressed the button. Sign up. The screen shifted again. A form appeared. Name, email, password. Simple things. Things she knew. Things she could do. She typed slowly, carefully, double-checking each line, taking her time. There was no rush, no pressure, just her and the process. When she finished, she stared at the screen for a moment, then pressed Create Account. And just like that, without any announcement, without any dramatic music, without anyone watching, Margaret Ellis, at 72 years old, had stepped into a world she once believed was not meant for her. She didn't fully understand it yet. She didn't feel confident. She didn't feel like an online seller. Not at all. But she had begun. And sometimes, that is the most important moment of all. Not when everything is clear. Not when everything is perfect. But when you choose to continue, despite not knowing. Margaret placed the phone down gently. Her hands rested in her lap. Her heart beat a little faster than usual, not from fear, but from something new, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Anticipation. She looked once more at the table runner, then at the phone, then back at the quiet room around her. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing felt the same anymore. Because now there was a direction. Not a clear one, not a guaranteed one, but a direction she had chosen. And deep inside that choice, a new version of her life was slowly beginning to take shape. Margaret did not tell anyone, not her children, not the young woman at the craft shop, not even herself, in a confident voice, because what she had done still felt fragile, like something that could disappear if she spoke too loudly about it. So she kept it quiet, not as a secret, but as something still becoming. The account she created remained open on her phone, a small space, empty, waiting. There was no product listed yet, no description, no price, just a beginning. That morning, she made her tea as usual, sat by the window, and looked at the table runner again. But this time, she didn't only see the fabric, she saw steps, next steps. Create a listing, she whispered. The words felt less intimidating now, still unfamiliar, but not impossible. She picked up her phone again, opened the app. The screen looked cleaner than she expected. Simple, guided. There were buttons, clear instructions. Almost as if someone had designed it for beginners, for people like her. Her finger hovered, then tapped. Add new item. The page opened slowly. A form appeared. Title, description, photos, price. Margaret leaned back slightly. So many parts, so many decisions. Her eyes moved carefully across the screen, not rushing, not panicking, just observing. Title, she said softly. She thought for a moment. What was this? A table runner, handmade, simple. She began typing. Handmade table runner. She stopped, looked at the words. They felt incomplete, plain, but maybe that was okay. She added a few more words. Handmade table runner, soft cotton, simple design. Margaret read it again. It wasn't perfect, but it was clear. She nodded slightly. That will do. Next came the description. This part felt harder because it required more than just naming. It required explaining, sharing. Why would someone choose this? Why would it matter? Margaret hesitated longer here. Her fingers rested still on the screen. She wasn't used to talking about her own work, especially not in a way that might convince someone else. But then she remembered something simple, the truth. So instead of trying to sound professional, she decided to sound honest. She typed slowly. This table runner is made by hand with care. It is simple, soft, and designed to bring a quiet feeling to your home. She paused, then continued. I started sewing again after many years, and this piece is part of that beginning. Margaret read the sentence. Her chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't just a product. It was a piece of her story. She didn't add more. She didn't try to make it longer. She left it as it was, because sometimes a few true words are enough. Next came the photos. She selected the one she had chosen the day before. The image appeared on the screen. Her work, displayed, visible. It felt different now, more real, more exposed, but also more meaningful. Then came the price. Margaret froze. Her fingers didn't move. Her mind went quiet. How do you put a price on something like this? On time? On effort? On rediscovery? She had never sold anything she made before. She had only given things away. To family, to neighbors, to people she knew. There was no money involved, only kindness. only connection. Now, this was different. This required a number, a decision, a value. Margaret leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes for a moment. "What is it worth?" she whispered. No answer came, at least, not immediately. Then another question followed. What would feel fair? That felt easier, less heavy. She thought about the fabric, the time, the effort, and then something else. Respect. Respect for her own work, for her own time, for her own beginning. Margaret opened her eyes, typed a number, not too high, not too low, just something that felt right. She looked at it for a long moment. Her heart beat a little faster again, because now, this was no longer just an idea. It was becoming real. Everything was filled. Title, description, photo, price. There was only one button left. Publish. Margaret stared at it. Her finger hovered above the screen. And suddenly, all the doubts returned, stronger than before. What if no one buys it? What if it's not good enough? What if people judge it? What if this is a mistake? Her breathing slowed. She didn't panic. She didn't rush. She simply listened, letting each thought appear, letting each one pass, because she had learned something important over the past weeks. Doubt does not disappear. It just becomes quieter when you don't follow it. Margaret looked at the button again. Then she said something out loud, soft but clear. I don't need this to be perfect. She paused, then added gently, I just need to try. And with that, she pressed the button. Publish. The screen changed. A small message appeared. Your item is now live. Margaret blinked. That was it. No sound, no celebration. No one clapping, just a simple sentence. And yet, everything felt different. She sat there for a long time, not moving, not speaking, just absorbing the moment, somewhere, out there, in a world she had never entered before. Her work existed, visible, available, waiting. It felt both exciting and strangely quiet. Nothing around her had changed. The same room, the same table, the same window. But inside her, something had shifted again, not dramatically, but deeply. She had crossed a line, an invisible one, from thinking to doing, from imagining to creating, from wondering to sharing. The rest of the day passed slowly. Margaret found herself checking her phone more often than usual, not obsessively, but with curiosity. Nothing had happened yet, no views, no messages, no sales. And surprisingly, that didn't disappoint her, because she understood something now. This was not about immediate results. This was about something much bigger: movement, growth, possibility. That evening, as the light faded once again, Margaret sat by the window, her hands resting gently in her lap, her phone beside her, quiet, still. She looked around her home, the same home she had lived in for years, the same walls, the same memories. But now, there was something new inside it. Not furniture, not decoration, but energy. A sense that life was not finished here, that something was still unfolding. Margaret smiled softly, a calm, steady smile, not because something big had happened, but because something real had begun. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if anyone would buy her work. She didn't know how far this path would go, but for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't asking those questions with fear. She was asking them with curiosity. And sometimes, that is the moment when everything changes. Not when you have answers, but when you are no longer afraid of not having them. Margaret reached for her tea, took a slow sip, and let the quiet evening settle around her. peaceful, gentle, full of something new, something she hadn't felt in years, a quiet sense of forward. And somewhere, beyond her window, beyond her street, beyond everything she had ever known, her small, imperfect handmade piece was waiting to be discovered, just like she was. The next morning felt different. Again, not dramatically, not in a way that someone else would notice. But Margaret noticed, because now, when she opened her eyes at 6:30, there was something new waiting for her. Not a routine, not a memory, but a possibility that existed outside her home, something she had created and released into the world. She sat at the edge of her bed for only a moment this time, then stood up, walked a little faster than usual, made her tea, and almost without thinking, she reached for her phone. Her fingers moved more naturally now, less hesitation, less doubt. She opened the app, paused, then looked. There it was, her listing, still there, still quiet. No notifications, no messages, no sales. Margaret blinked once, then nodded slowly. "That's all right," she whispered, and surprisingly, she meant it, because something inside her had already shifted beyond needing immediate results. She placed the phone down gently, walked to the table, and looked at the empty space where the table runner had been. For a moment, the emptiness felt strange, but not uncomfortable. It felt like space, room for something else, room for more. "What if I make another one?" she said quietly. The question came easily now, without resistance, without fear. It wasn't a big decision. It didn't feel heavy. It felt natural. So that morning, Margaret returned to her chair by the window, picked up new fabric, and began again. This time, her hands moved with a little more confidence, not perfectly, but more freely. She didn't stop at every small mistake. She didn't question every line. She allowed the process to flow, stitch by stitch, moment by moment. And as she worked, something else quietly changed. She was no longer just trying something new. She was building something. Even if it was small, even if it was slow, it was hers. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Margaret was sitting in her usual spot, sewing quietly, when her phone made a small sound, a soft notification. She paused, looked at it. Her heart beat just a little faster. She reached for the phone, opened the app, and there it was. "Your item has been viewed." Margaret stared at the words, read them again. Viewed. Someone had seen it, a stranger somewhere, in a place she couldn't imagine, looking at something she had made with her own hands. A slow breath filled her chest. Not excitement, not yet, but something close to wonder. "They saw it," she whispered. That alone felt meaningful. She placed the phone down carefully. Her hands rested on the fabric in front of her, and for a moment, she simply sat there, letting the feeling settle, because this wasn't about numbers. It wasn't about success. It was about connection, a small, invisible thread stretching from her quiet home to someone else's life. The next day, it happened again. Another view, then another, each one small, each one silent, but each one real. Margaret began to check her phone less often, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't need to. She trusted that whatever was happening was happening. And in the meantime, she kept creating. One piece became two, two became three, different fabrics, different colors, each one slightly better than the last. Not because she forced improvement, but because she allowed learning. One afternoon, as she carefully folded a finished piece, her phone made that soft sound again. Margaret smiled slightly. She had begun to recognize it. Without rushing, she reached for the phone, opened the app, and then she froze for just a second. Her eyes widened. Her breath paused because the message was different this time. Congratulations, you made your first sale. Margaret didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stared at the screen, reading the sentence again and again, as if it might disappear, as if it might not be real. My first, she whispered. Her voice felt small, almost fragile. Sale. She placed the phone down slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something much deeper. Recognition, after all the quiet steps, all the small beginnings, all the moments of doubt, something had come back to her. A response, a yes. Somewhere, someone had chosen her work, not because they knew her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Margaret stood up slowly, walked to the table, looked at the finished pieces laid out before her. Her eyes softened. This matters, she said quietly, not in a loud, proud way, but in a calm, certain way. That evening, she prepared the item carefully, folding it gently, wrapping it with attention, as if she were sending a small part of herself, because in truth, she was. The next morning, she walked a little further than usual, holding the package in her hands. The air was cool, the street was quiet, but everything felt different, because now she wasn't just walking for routine, she was walking with purpose. When she reached the post office, she paused for a moment outside the door, not from hesitation, but from awareness of how far she had come, not in distance, but in spirit. She opened the door, stepped inside, and sent the package on its way. Just like that. No ceremony, no audience. But something inside her felt complete, and something else was just beginning. Days turned into weeks. Margaret continued, not rushing, not chasing, just building, piece by piece, moment by moment. Her small online shop slowly grew. A few sales, then a few more. Messages from strangers, simple words. Beautiful work. Thank you. I love this. Each message felt like a quiet conversation, a connection, a reminder that she was still part of the world, still creating, still contributing. One afternoon, her daughter called. They spoke as they always did, warmly, comfortably. But this time, Margaret shared something new. I've been sewing again, she said. Her daughter smiled through the phone. That's wonderful, Mom. Margaret paused, then added gently, I sold something. There was a moment of silence, then a soft, emotional laugh. You did what? Margaret smiled, a real, full smile. I started something small. And in that moment, she realized something important. This wasn't just about selling. It wasn't just about sewing. It wasn't even about starting a business. It was about reclaiming a part of herself she thought was gone. The part that creates, the part that learns, the part that begins again. At 72, Margaret hadn't just changed her life. She had expanded it, quietly, gently, one step at a time. And maybe that is the most powerful kind of change there is. Not loud, not fast, but steady and real. So if you're listening to this story and a small voice inside you is asking, is it too late for me? Maybe Margaret's journey offers a different answer. Not a loud one, not a perfect one, but a true one. It might not be. Because sometimes the life you think is behind you is actually waiting, just ahead. All it needs is one small step and the courage to take it. Thank you for listening. If this story brought you a sense of calm or a small spark of hope, take a quiet moment today and ask yourself one simple question. What if I try? And if that question stays with you, Maybe that's where your story begins.